Hello, and welcome to EdPR, the podcast that brings you the hottest trends in education from the best teachers around the country. EdPR is brought to you by Learnerator.com.
Welcome back to the Learnerator EdPR podcast, where we talk to you about the hottest educational trends. Today's guest is Eric Ulias, who will be talking to us about secrets from the AP reading. Eric, would you like to say hello to your adoring fans?
Wasn't where I had any, but more the merrier. Thank you.
Here they are. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I teach AP psychology. This is, I think it's my 10th or 11th year teaching it. I've been an AP reader now for 5 years, quite an experience. We'll get into that. I teach at a public school in rural Pennsylvania, in suburbia Pennsylvania, about an hour west of Philadelphia. It's called Wyomissing. We have a really good tradition of AP scores, and consequently we're ranked #1 public school in the state as a result of our high pass rate there. And I also coach cross country and track all year round, so literally I'm running around the school constantly, and I like to use some of the motivation and emotion principles to help motivate my athletes to become better runners and better performers in the classroom.
Do they know that they're being your, AP Psych guinea pigs?
Absolutely. No one's asking questions about it.
Do you use operant conditioning? Do you give them treats?
Positive reinforcement whenever possible, because that's better to get the achieve goals rather than punishment, of course. Oh. So yes, we're a big fan of Skinner.
Do you put them in a box like mice?
Theoretically, around the track, they're in a box.
Close enough, I guess. Yeah. Great. So, Eric, you chose this quote: "If the brain were so simple we could understand it, we would be so simple we couldn't." As sort of your quote that encapsulates your teaching philosophy, or maybe how you feel about your subject. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay. Great quote. I love that on so many different levels. In terms of just personally, first psychology class I took was in college in 1990, and the 90s were called the year of the brain because we've had all these marvelous breakthroughs about what the brain can do and where certain functions are localized, and we began to really understand a lot about the brain and more information about neurotransmitters. Heck, I think Prozac was only invented in like the late 80s. Mm-hmm. So just think about how far we've come since then. So it seemed to be the point where mankind was maybe being a little bit arrogant, like, wow, we've got this all figured out. We know that this part of the brain deals with this function. We got it all figured out. But the more that we kept digging, we realized, you know what, this is true some of the times. And we figured, well, maybe the hippocampus is only responsible for this kind of memory. And you know what, maybe it doesn't really process memory. Maybe it just stored someplace else. And the more that we were digging and learning, we found out that there was a lot more to learn. So I guess really what the quote is saying, that it's good that we don't understand all the nuances of our brain, because if we did, we'd be simpletons. We would be, and then consequently our brain would be so simple we wouldn't be able to understand in the first place. We wouldn't have any self-reflection because our brain wouldn't allow that kind of introspection. So that's why I really like the quote, and it's humbling, but it also just shows how much brain research has come at the same time. Absolutely.
Do you think we're ever going to understand all of the nuances and little quirks in our brains?
I don't think so. It's way too many connections. The more connections in the brain than our stars in the galaxy, there's just too much going on there. But we can get close. We can get close.
We've definitely come a long way since the early days of Prozac. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. So let's transition into talking about, secrets from the AP reading, which is perhaps not as juicy or perhaps juicier as secrets of the brain, depending on where you're standing. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what is an AP reading?
All right, good question. All students will take some kind of AP examination in May.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully they can do that. I should say that everyone that takes it, they'll have the multiple choice section, which is graded obviously by a computer scantron, if you will. Mm-hmm. Then there's some kind of written component. And in AP psychology, their FRQs are 2 of them. And those are graded by a human, all right? So these humans, in my case, psychology teachers or psychology professors, are all shipped to one particular area all throughout the nation. We arrive, and for the last 5 years or so, it's been in Kansas City. And there's roughly about 400 AP psychology readers, and we're responsible for grading. I believe last year was almost 250,000 FRQs. And so we sit in these huge rooms for about a week, 8 hours a day, and we grade each one of those things one by one. It's truly a marvelous, when you see it in action. You've got hundreds of teachers sitting silently in this giant convention center, and they're just, grading over point by point by point, and we tend to be very reliable because we're following a rubric. So we want to make sure that we are reliable and consistent with our answers. So if I grade it, I get the same score as someone else grades it. And that's really neat. It's really neat because it's a great professional development, activity, and you get to make camaraderie is amazing, and you learn a lot of your subject area, and you really get to network and make some great friends and some really neat colleagues. So that's the AP reading. It sounds kind of crazy telling people that you spend your first week in June, because that's when this happens, grading thousands of exams, and typically an AP reader will grade 1,000. Some of the faster ones grade 2,000, sometimes 3,000. But it's a pride to do this all together, and we really learn our content area, and again, make networking and friends.
Absolutely.
So that's the AP reading.
So I have a couple of questions. So as I understand it, there's more than one person who will read any given FRQ. Is that correct?
It depends on the content area. In AP psychology, we are typically assigned one question. For example, last year I was question number 2, and there were 2 questions in the FRQ portion, and I'm alone graded it. However, there is a chance that a table leader can backtrack as a mean of security and just checking our reliability. So there's a chance that, although I've graded a particular essay, that I might be backtracked by another person, my supervisor, so to speak. And hopefully our scores are consistent with one another. And if they're not, then we get called back to the table, and we have to make sure that we're on point and that we are being clear on the rubric and we're grading things the same and we're seeing things the same, because having reliability is the utmost importance. We don't want one student have a quote-unquote an easy teacher and someone has a more difficult teacher. Just not fair. We want to make it as equitable as possible. So, no, I grade all mine, all one of mine, with the exception of I have someone that will occasionally double check my scoring.
I see. And so the point is to make the scoring the same. It's not to take sort of an average of the scores. It's just to decide on one score, and that's it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay. There is certain ways. Ideally, they want the score to be kind of quote unquote average. There might be 7 points in a particular FRQ, and you want to have maybe the average to be 3 or 4, because if it's like 6 or 7, that's obviously ridiculous. But it'd be 1, and that's usually where the rubric writing comes in. So as long as we're following the rubric, the average should pan out.
So who creates the rubric?
Okay, the rubric is created by a rubric master. What a cool title! A rubric master.
I hope that person gets to wear a cape.
She didn't last year, but that's a pretty cool title, though, the rubric master. What happens is the way the process unfolds, that all the essays arrive to the destination. Last year was Kansas City. This year will be actually in we're going to be in Louisville, if I'm saying that right.
Kentucky.
You got to slur. Louisville, not Louisville. Louisville. You got to kind of slur. Right. So anyway, the FRQs arrive there first. Then table leaders and the rubric master will read through a bunch of these FRQs just to get a sense of where kids are coming from. Maybe the intention was students see it one way, they see it another way, and you change the rubric accordingly. So the rubric is actually established after the fact, after maybe a sampling of FRQs have been looked at by teachers and, of course, the rubric master. And from that, then the rubric master then creates this rubric that, by and large, we follow to a T. In fact, the quote is, submit to the rubric. Even though I personally disagree with the way a scoring is going on one particular point, I got to put my biases aside and just go with the flow and just follow what everyone else does, because we're supposed to be reliable as possible. So that's important. So if one teacher is teaching something one way, and you never know what exactly the rubric will say, so it's really important to be, I think, complete enough in your answers. Tell your students to make sure that, is this sufficient? You want to be as complete as possible, because you never know what the level of criteria will be to get the point on a rubric.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of how to get those points on that rubric, tell us about, what a student can do in order to get those highest scores.
Okay, well, I think you want to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that you are never parroting the prompt.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that you don't waste your time writing introduction and conclusion. You want to make sure that you are writing a space, because you have to remember, we are humans, AP readers, and we will grade literally hundreds of these FRQs per day. And if we seeing something that's written in sloppy handwriting, written in glitter pen, God forbid, pencil, or just block forbid, we do our best to give points. However, if it's hard to read, you're just making it harder for us to help you. So I think that's really important. Read in a way that's organized and is legible, I think, is probably point number one. Another real thing to consider is technique TDA. Write the term, underline it, define it, and apply it. I think that works really well, because even though instructions may explicitly say definitions are not needed, definitions don't apply, but there have been so many times when even the directions don't tell you to define something, that simply a good definition and gives the reading some kind of inference that the student knows what they're talking about. And even if the application may be weak, perhaps a quote-unquote a kick-ass definition, as one table leader told me, is enough to get the point. So I think just organization is critical, making it clear and neat to read, and TDA, and make sure that you have good definitions and you speak specifically. You're not talking about stuff or things. For example, you're mentioning reinforcement, not reward. You're in psychology class, terms, use them. So I think those are paramount importance to maximize your scores.
Absolutely. So I'm looking here at these applications in teaching psychology, and it looks like in order to get a student to write a really fantastic FRQ, it looks like the teacher, really, the onus is on the teacher to model constantly and consistently. So at what point in the school year do you think, FRQs should be assigned in an AP psychology class?
I did it today. I did it today, in fact. My lesson plan was how to write an FRQ. We looked at it actually on Friday, and they wrote one based on 2014's question number one, which is a big, ugly stat question. And then I walked through a PowerPoint that explained point by point, while the kids had the actual rubric that we as readers got. And all these rubrics are available on College Board. The College Board has all the rubrics available. So I encourage teachers to go to them, students to go to them, see what the level of sophistications need to get the points, and do it throughout the year. We're going to have our first test tomorrow, and there'll be the following day will be an FRQ. So the model in class 1 said, and they're going to do this probably 2 or 3 times a quarter, and try to make it as simulated as possible. Give them 25 minutes to write the response. Don't give them any inclination of what it's going to be about, because students don't know what it's going to be about. And I think, thinking quick on your feet without being prompted, it's going to be on this topic or this topic is quite helpful.
Absolutely. That's a nice little 1-2 punch. Give them a test and then give them an FRQ right after. That is cold. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next slide. So here we are in our key takeaways, and I think you've just covered number 1, to take time to submit FRQs in a simulated format. So do you want to just say a tiny bit more about that?
Yeah. You want to make sure you, again, don't let the students know what FRQ they're getting. If you have multiple classes, give each class a separate FRQ, because they're going to be talking about it. I have 4 sections of AP Psychology. I actually have 5 FRQs ready. So I got one for each class, and I got a 5th one for makeups. And a good reason to subscribe to Learnerator is because they even have practice FRQs on there. At least they will be on there. At least I submitted them. And I have one for this unit. So multiple FRQs is possible. You can find them everywhere. You can find in practice books, Learnerator, of course. On the College Board has a lot of different FRQs dating back, I think, back to like 2000. Those are all great sources. So use them and use them quite frequently. Simulate practice is key.
So this is maybe a little off topic, but how important is writing, like pure writing skills? So let's say sounds like this is a good topic.
Yeah, it's a good topic. I tell my kids, this is an English class.
I see.
This is psychology class. You're writing FRQ, not a 5-paragraph essay. Mm-hmm. So as long as you write in sentences are defined as a noun and a verb. Mm-hmm. Good enough. I'm not looking for flowery language or wonderful transitions to connect one idea to another. Just write very mechanical and boring, as long as it's clear. Mm-hmm. We like that as readers. There's no extra credit for using SAT vocabulary. Just use the psychology vocabulary to make your point clear. Mm-hmm. So really, probably a lot of writing teachers that are cringing at hearing this, but conclusions, introductions, thesis statements, don't even bother. You're wasting your time because we don't even really read that, quite frankly.
Okay.
So maybe that's the cold hard truth.
So just answer the question grammatically, clearly, and be done.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. And then it looks like, the very last is don't parrot. So does that mean don't repeat the language of the question?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. For example, I'll give you a great example. This year, there was identity versus role confusion was a term that had to be applied to a scenario of I can't remember the college kid's name. The college kid's name that was going off to college. How would this affect them? Well, obviously, if you don't know your identity, you don't know what club to fit in, what classes to take, what your major should be, and we were shown the rubric was intending the student to show concept and application. Oftentimes, students their concept is, well, if you don't know your identity, you won't know your major. Mm-hmm. But that's parroting the question because you didn't explain what identity is. Mm. You can explain it, and you had to say who I am. So even if it sounds simplistic as, well, identity is a term that probably any fifth grader knows. Now you have to put that in your own words. Who I am. Our classic example was not a lot more technical, was feature detectors. Feature detectors are these neural cells in your brain that are responsible for lines, movement, and edges. I can't tell you how many times I've read a FRQ on that particular point stating that feature detectors detect features.
Excellent. Excellent.
So things like that, even if the kids have no idea what they're talking about, use a different word. Detect characteristics. That actually might have scored, believe it or not. Detect characteristics. Don't parrot back, wow, come on, let's parrot. Don't parrot back the exact stem. If worse comes to worse, just put another word in, a new word, a synonym, something. So it helps detect characteristics. There you go. That would score, but not detect features.
It's pretty antithetical to the way that students are taught to write, especially in middle school or even elementary school with that 5-paragraph essay frame where you do want to parrot the language. I remember, teaching my 6th graders how to write a full sentence, parrot the answer, or parrot the language of the question when you're writing the answer. But obviously this is a far cry from 6th grade English. And,
now, Grant, you do have to refer to the prompt continuously. If your scenario is dealing with Johnny going to college, you better be talking about Johnny. So there's, I guess, there's a certain amount of parroting that's required, but it shouldn't be, verbatim. It's at least the term. The term is asking you for feature detectors. Don't detect features. Okay.
Yeah.
But you better talk about how Johnny's feature detectors now detect characteristics, I suppose. But I think, it's a different model of writing in a 5-paragraph essay.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it sounds like the key takeaway is to refer to the prompt, but also keep your own definitions and use your own words as much as you can.
Well said.
Excellent. Well said. Yeah, I was trying not to parrot, but there we go. Awesome. Is there any last words of advice for either our teachers who are listening or our students who are listening about FRQs before we move on?
Yeah, I think they're the hardest part of the exam, without a doubt. I mean, you go in there cold. The realm of psychology, there's potentially 1,000 different vocabulary words you could be asked to know. Don't freak out. There's going to be 1 or 2 words you've never heard of before out of 7, and that's normal. The mean score for these things are usually ridiculously low, like 2.4 out of 7. So don't freak out because you don't know 2 terms and kill you. It's the hardest part of the exam. If you score 4 or 5 out of 7, you're doing really, really, really well. And the multiple choice actually constitutes for 2/3 of your exam, and these FRQs are only 1/3. So, you could just hang in there on the FRQs. As long as you get like an 80% or so on your multiple choice, you're well on the way of getting a 4 and a 5. So I think that's real important. Is don't get beat up, don't get discouraged during that FRQ process.
Yeah, I'm suddenly a lot more sympathetic towards that feature detector kid, because that's probably just a term he just didn't learn the whole year, didn't remember. But...
And I'll tell you what, I think I awarded it. I awarded it very, very, very few times. Not many kids got that.
Yeah.
Only a handful of kids got it. And I'll tell you what, the one time it was perspective memory, and it was only in 1 book. I think of the 2000 exams I graded that year, only 7 kids got that right out of 2000. So it was a question that was just
nice and sadistic.
It was a really hard question. Most kids never heard it.
Yeah.
And so don't beat yourself up. There's some things that you're not going to know.
Eric, I want to transition from you're giving this awesome advice to our students and teachers, but now I'd like to sort of head into the rapid fire round, which hopefully will be less painful than it sounds, and hear about the best teaching advice you've ever received.
I would say the best teaching advice that I've ever received was just be diligent, be organized, have a plan, be prepared, know more than your kids know. I think it's always a good plan, at least for an AP class, because you're going to get some bright kids in there that are going to challenge you. So I think know your stuff, and then when you don't know it, just say, hey, I don't know if I'll let you know tomorrow. I'll find out for that.
So it sounds like you're definitely taking that advice to heart in your classroom with your 5 FRQs for your 4 preps. That definitely sounds like a diligence and organization. Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of teachers think I'm saying in that respect.
Well,
a lot of teachers think that's kind of crazy so much, but I have the material, so I might as well use it.
Exactly, and you work for Learnerator, or you work with Learnerator, so all the resources you've created, all the resources. So, what's one personal habit aside from this extensive organization that has led you to teaching success and to such a high pass rate for your students?
I think, I hate to say teaching the test in terms of psychology, I think is really good. I think being a taskmaster, so maybe that goes hand in hand with the organization. Keep on schedule. In the Northeast here, we had a mountain of snow days, so you really got to make sure that you keep on that schedule no matter what sort of circumstances the weather brings or life brings. So I think really being a taskmaster and keeping on that schedule so that you have 2 weeks to review at the end. I mean, the kids need that review. So many times I know people say, I never got a chance to review, and I think that's really critical. Make sure you have 2 weeks to review, even if you're blowing through a couple units. That one unit might only be 3% of the exam or 5% of the exam, but that review is helpful because it complements all the exam. So those things, stay on task, being a taskmaster.
Not a rubric master, a taskmaster.
Maybe one day a rubric master.
Awesome. So what's your favorite teaching resource?
Learnerator, of course.
Of course.
Honestly, video. I just love any kind of video. I'm a video freak. I show kids that I can't believe all the videos we watch in this class, and it's an AP class. Yeah, so a ton of video. But it has to be on point video. I like my video segments to be like 5 to 10 minutes max. I like, you guys read this in class. Here's my application of scenario. And here's a video on it, and then we move on to the next concept and follow that format. So, Brain Games by Nat Geo was awesome. Anything by PBS is also really, really good. Sometimes Nightline is nice and short stuff. They've got really good things on there. God, there are just so many. Scientific American Frontiers, also on PBS. Nova Science Now. There's so many great resources out there. So I think video is excellent. Show some kind of video. And in psychology, there are so many great examples of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get to diversify and get at your visual learners as well. So that's definitely helpful. Yeah. So our last question. You wake up one day and you are now the principal of your high school. Congratulations. What's the first thing you do?
Persuade our AP director to get a school license for Learnerator. I really that's a great question. I'm thinking, oh my God, what do I do with this? Well, I'll tell you what, the biggest thing we complained about our principals in years past was discipline, because if there isn't discipline, you're not going to be able to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So I think making sure that discipline is cracked down and appropriate punishments, or reinforcement, Skinner carried out.
Yep.
So I think something like that would be helpful, just making sure discipline's in line, especially for a school district that maybe is running amok, because oftentimes I think a bigger frustrations of teachers is that teachers want to punish kids for inappropriate behavior, and then if they're back and they should be suspended or be punished and they're back in the classroom, and then people realize this is all a joke. So probably that way in general, but we've had to discipline our way, so I really don't think it applies to my particular school. Our new principal has been fabulous. Mm-hmm. In our school, I really don't know. I mean, I was trying to struggling with this, but we've been encouraging more kids to take AP, and I think it's a great thing. I think maybe that's the one thing, have more resources for that, because I could really use a new textbook.
Absolutely.
So I would probably say that, because I think that I'm really proud of having a lot more minorities and maybe people who've never taken AP class or taken AP psychology. My class numbers have doubled. Mm-hmm. So I would think the principal continue to support Learnerator and AP classes in general. And by and large, my principal's been right on clue in that. So I don't have much I can say that my principal's doing. Maybe just a hypothetical principle, I would say discipline and push AP classes. I think are a couple critical components of success.
Absolutely. At the school district where I used to teach, which I will not name, discipline was a very big problem. But an even bigger problem was that they decided to cut funding for AP and IB because they called it extracurricular activities. So I'm 100% on board with your theoretical principal plan. So if you want to come to my former school district and revolutionize it, we need you. But Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have questions for Eric, you can email him at hello@learnerator.com, and be sure to check out his amazing AP Psych content, which also includes awesome videos. And join us next time for our segment on college admissions. Thanks for listening.
Okay, bye-bye.
You've been listening to EdPR, your one-stop shop for all things ed-related. Want to join the conversation? Write to us at hello@learnerator.com.